Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst Nathan Dean writing in a note ahead of this event that, quote, the most likely scenario is a short-term stoppage with reopening feasible as soon as the October 4th weekend. We look for policy implications of the shutdown. And for that, we go to Nathan Dean. He joins us now, America's dad, without the vest. Nathan, what are the implications in terms of, for example, an effect on the economy? I think the 2018-2019 shutdown erased $11 billion, but we got 8 of that back. So at the end, we only lost about $3 billion of GDP.
Yeah, so I think there's really 3 impacts that we've been telling our clients. And the first is, when it comes to the markets in particular, the 2018-2019 shutdown showed a dramatic drop in the S&P 500. And based off of today's data, we haven't really been seeing that. So a lot of it could be headline risk. And I think folks are more accustomed to a partisan Washington than they were before. The second is data. Obviously the Bureau of Labor Statistics is not working, and there's a lot of data out there that our clients are using, whether it's jobs data, commodity data, et cetera, and the data is not going to be there. And then finally, the economic question, like you mentioned, 750,000 government workers are furloughed right now, and they're not going to get paid. The next major paycheck comes in next Friday. So if you're trying to game this out, obviously the next 2 to 3 weeks are going to be important. If this shutdown goes further, that's when you're going to start to see the economic impact of that, primarily here in the Washington, D.C. region to start, but then I think it just trickles throughout the rest of the United States.
I just want to point out a function on the Bloomberg a lot of people have mentioned today, Nathan. WSL space ALTE shows alternative data sources that you can use while the government is, while the federal workers are on furlough here. How many firings do you expect, and how many are going to come back? Because the Trump administration, one of its main goals has been to shrink the size of the federal employee base. This is an opportunity for them to do it. President Trump says it's likely, and he can blame the Democrats for it. Is he really going to go through with it?
So right now, I think we're at the point where it's still political posturing, and I don't think there's actually a plan yet. I take that back. The Office of Management and Budget and Director Russ Vought certainly has a plan, but it's not up to him. It's up to President Trump. And I think what happens here is you're going to see negotiations take place later this weekend, and then that's when the decision will be made. Should we move forward with this or not? Because look, if the president decides that he wants to just lay off a lot of these workers, there are court cases that are mostly going to come, but they can move forward with this progress. But I would point out is that the Virginia, Maryland senators in particular can stave a lot of this off so that if the threats do come forth, then you could have those 2 Virginians and 2 Marylanders come forth and say, look, I'm going to support to reopen the government, because if they do that, then you stave off and you get ahead of the OMB.
Can you clear up something that I've heard the president say and a number of Republicans, that the Democrats want to give illegal aliens free health care? Is that really the case? I know the Republicans wanted to pass a clean CR, and the Democrats want to add about $1.5 trillion in health care and other funding. But is part of that somehow going to allow undocumented immigrants access to free health care?
This is one of those talking points where both sides are right and both sides are wrong, and they're really just pointing at the portions that they think play politically advantageous to them. And that's where the problem is with the shutdown at the moment, is because both sides go into a shutdown thinking that they are the ones that have the best political positions. The Republicans offered this clean CR through November 20th. They think that they have the moral high ground. The Democrats, on the other hand, say, look, we want to be seen fighting President Trump, and we also want to fight for these Obamacare subsidies that expire at the end of the year. And I don't think they're going to get that while the government is shut down. But this is where I think this solution potentially could be found, is that if the Democrats later this week, or beginning more likely next week, come to figure it out that they can actually achieve their goal of fighting President Trump with maybe a gentleman's agreement or an unofficial handshake, that they will deal with the Obamacare subsidies later, because I think that's something that President Trump wants. The rest of his party may not, but I think President Trump certainly wants to take care of these Obamacare subsidies before the November 2026 midterms. That's where the solution will be found, and ultimately I think the government stoppage can end.
Nathan, we have obviously a large portion of our viewers are working at banks, probably many of them at Morgan Stanley, and now they have diminished regulation to deal with. This is one of the promises of the Trump presidency, right? We have the Federal Reserve, not that they're working in lockstep with the administration, lowering the capital requirement, the buffer requirement to 4.3% from an initial 5.1%. Are we going to see continued moves like this?
I think so, because this is an easy win for the Federal Reserve. This doesn't have to go through a rulemaking. What happened here is that Morgan Stanley petitioned the Federal Reserve as part of their stress testing process to lower their what's known as stress capital buffer from 5.3% to just north of 4%. And the Fed looked at it and said, you know what, you're right. Now, it doesn't have to go through a rulemaking, and so it's an immediate change. This takes effective today, and so now Morgan Stanley is a little bit better situation because, in their view, they've been overpaying for this. Now, the deregulation argument when it comes to banks in particular is still a story about time. This was a quick win for the Fed, and this only applies to Morgan Stanley. But when you're talking about other things like the Basel III endgame or any type of GSIB surcharge change that is applied to Bank of America or JP Morgan or Citigroup, that still remains in the idea that proposals have to come out, proposals have to be worked on, and it really isn't going to hit your bottom line until 2027. So if you see more stress capital buffer petitions coming from the industry, think short term if the Fed is okay with it, everything else long term.
All right, this is why you're so popular at Bloomberg Intelligence, because people know you have the answers. Nathan, thanks so much for joining us. Nathan Dean there of Bloomberg Intelligence covers the government policy and all the regulations coming out of it for us out of Washington, D.C. Coming